Welcome to This Is Why I Don't Vote, a podcast. Episode 6. A forum. A safe space to discuss sports, politics, social issues, even religion, where we will take it all very seriously, but not too seriously. This week I'm going to make an addition to the mission statement, an epiphany that I had over the weekend as I was watching what was the folly of my NCAA bracket fall apart. Too often, I find myself thinking cynically and believing that I'm thinking critically. I want to use this podcast as an opportunity to challenge my own cynical thinking. Am I actually being critical, or am I simply being a contemptible prick? Only time, and you, dear listener, your input will tell. On to the main attraction.
Act 1, Migrant Train.
Chirp, 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 went the Biden loyalists. The border is a mess. Our treatment of the migrants is a mess. As we, the public, should realize, it's a hell of a lot easier for these politicians to get onto their pedestals, their high horses, and backbite, criticize the policy decisions of a previous administration. That's the easy part. The hard part is then taking power and addressing the problem. Barack Obama spoke loftily about the preservation, the protection of the whistleblower, and in his administration proceeded to prosecute whistleblowers at a rate and with a severity that had never been before seen. Power and authority look a hell of a lot different when you're the one wielding the instrument versus commenting on the application by someone else. The migrant issue at the border. Curiously, in all of the media coverage, in all of the political wranglings, in all of the posturing, there is never a discussion of why such a migrant train exists in the 21st century. Well, these people are poor, and they come from a poor country, and they want to go to a rich country. 5th and 6th grade rationale, 5th and 6th grade sophistication out of the mouths of 50 and 60-year-olds. Guatemala wasn't a rich country in 1988. El Salvador wasn't a rich country in 1993. Costa Rica wasn't a rich country in 2002. Why now? Why the migrant train now? The migrant train exists now for one reason. It's simple, it's apparent, and it sticks out like that 415-pound Green Bay Packers fan wearing nothing but a pair of blue jeans at a home game when it's minus 13 below zero. The migrant train exists because of our love of that delicious, delicious cocaine. We can't get enough of that cocaine. How dare you, sir? How dare you trivialize the dangers, the addiction, the destructiveness of cocaine? Shut up, Puritan. Shut up. Lie to yourself. Lie to your spouse. Lie to your parents. Lie to your kids. Lie to Jesus. Don't lie to me. Cocaine, in the U.S. alone, is likely over $100 billion. Who's doing all that cocaine? Think about it. Who is doing all of these drugs? Who is snorting all this cocaine? Who's shooting all this cocaine? Who is smoking all of this cocaine? Go out and try to find data about that. Think about all of the hundreds, if not billions of dollars that we've spent in this quote-unquote war on drugs, and try to go out and find data on consumption. Go on 3 websites, you find 3 different sets of data, 3 different sets of statistics. By way of the numbers, aggregately, it appears that between 2.5 and 4 million people have used cocaine in the last year. Again, 2.5 to 4 million. Are you fucking kidding me? Are you fucking kidding me? As national drug policy, these idiots believe that there's only roughly 2 million people in this country using cocaine. Propaganda, plain and simple. Do you remember the exercise we did on aliens and dragons? By way of the data, then, there are more people who believe in dragons than there are who have used cocaine in the last year. This isn't a war on drugs. This is a war on my intelligence. Look at the tons and tons and tons of that powder that's coming into this country. So between 2.5, on the far side, 4 million people would have to be snorting through that stuff like Tony Montoya at the end of Scarface. Sorry, folks, I'm not buying it. So your puritanical revulsion, I'm not buying that either. I'm not here to judge. I'm not here to criticize. But I'm surely not buying your puritanical bullshit. To state it another way, cocaine is like, let's say, Right Zed Fred. You remember Right Zed Fred, a band that came out, well, a band, if you can call it that came out with the single. Do you remember the name of the single? I'm Too Sexy. You remember it. You remember it like that shot of tequila you did for the first time at age 16 and then puked all over the side of the deck of your friend's parents' house, swearing off tequila for the next 5 years until you reached college, and then astutely had another shot of tequila that then prompted you to puke on your roommate's bed, thereby creating a feud that led to your reassignment to another room. We can all sit back and laugh about that now, right? But let's be clear. That song hit #1 on the Billboard chart in the United States of America. Millions of people went out and bought that single. There are many a puritanical asshole to this day that if you rifled through boxes in their attic, you would come across. That's right. I'm Too Sexy by Right Said Fred. Terrible. Just terrible. Bad song, bad memories. A shameful time in your life, but one of reflection and growth. Is that how you see it now? Is it? No. We hide. We deny. You don't have me fooled, Puritans. Cocaine is just like Right Said Fred. Well, to be clear, I believe Right Said Fred is actually more detrimental to your health than cocaine, but I believe the analogy stands. Socially, we want to downplay the prevalence of things that are so detrimental to us, that cast you in a poor social light or have a negative social stigma. As a society, we don't want to admit the popularity of that delicious, delicious cocaine. Just like we don't want to admit the popularity, and more particularly, the amount of money that was spent on Right Said Fred. But the reality, dear listener, is the same. More people than you and I want to admit have partaken. Why is this important? Why would we go into such detailed discussing? It's quite simple. In the 1990s, the United States focused on Colombia as the #1 exporter of cocaine, and with the help of the Colombian government and governments around the world, dismantled the drug cartels within that country. Do they still exist? Of course, but not nearly at the size or strength that they once did. Now, here's the little dirty secret about law enforcement. All law enforcement officials know this to be the truth. You rarely simply dismantle criminal organizations and destroy black markets. You simply push them off into other areas. You may fragment the organizations that are involved. You may change the locations of where these services or products are actually obtainable, but you don't simply destroy black markets, and you don't simply dismantle the criminal organizations involved in those markets. What happened to the drug cartels that were dismantled in Colombia in the 1990s? The power vacuum created opportunities, And those opportunities presented themselves in Central America and in Mexico. Cocaine, heroin, methamphetamine, cartels in Central America and in Mexico just came in and filled in the gap. The demand in the United States for these drugs was so high, and so little was done to stem the power of the cartels in Central America and Mexico in supplying that demand, that these cartels have just grown out of control and power. These cartels are so powerful, they now challenge the authority of every one of the governments in Central America and even in Mexico. They do what they want. They get what they want. This destabilization has created this migrant train. Our consumption of cocaine, of methamphetamine, of heroin has created this migrant train. A common refrain in response to this is, well, why do they come here? Think about it. And again, let's think critically, not cynically. Where is all that demand for the drugs coming from? It's coming from you and I. It's coming from the United States. We have the economic means, the wherewithal to buy all those drugs. Why wouldn't these migrants want to come here? If there is so much opportunity, if there is so much money, that as a nation we can consume that level of narcotics, why wouldn't they want to come here? This is the perfect place to come if you are running away from a drug cartel that's going to kill you, going to rape every female member of your family, going to corrupt the local, the city, the federal government. I don't agree with our immigration laws. I think the migrant train is an extremely difficult problem to address, specifically because, although I can sympathize with many of these people, you just can't let anyone with a good sob story come into this country. On the flip side of that, many of these people have great sob stories. Why? Because we know as a nation that those drug cartels are capable of anything. These drug cartels are taking female sex slaves. These drug cartels are demanding that everyone work in service of smuggling drugs. These cartels are demanding that you work in either manufacture or distribution. They're not asking. That's not the type of organizations that they are. If you demand of me a solution for the migrant train, the easiest solution is the most apparent one, and it is a solution that we've been morally wrestling with for 60 to 70 years. Why is it that there is such a high consumption of black market drugs in this country? In the 80s, it was cocaine, specifically crack. In the 90s, it was methamphetamine. In the late aughts, it was opium. What are we wrestling with? What is the solution that's been staring us in the face for decades? It's decriminalization and treatment versus criminalization and punishment. We elected criminalization and punishment, and it's been an utter failure. Failure! I personally wrestle with whether or not decriminalization and treatment is the smarter path. You don't want to reward any of these fuckwits for their terrible life choices. Yet looking at the social cost, what else do we do? Our love for that delicious, delicious cocaine has created a mass exodus of human beings out of one geographic region into our geographic region. We have to reckon with how we created that scenario that is now becoming such a burden on us.
Act Two Idiots Discuss Sports.
On a podcast that no one listens to, hosted by a guy that you've never heard of, in-depth basketball analysis by one of my friends, Brian. Brian, introduce yourself to the people.
Good evening, people. I hope you're well wherever you are this evening. Sheltered in place, healthy, and awake.
Well, if they're not awake, we'll put them to sleep after talking about basketball for 20 to 30 minutes.
I give it 20 to 30 seconds, but we'll see what we can do.
As a West Virginia fan, the kids went into the Big 12 tournament. High expectations, lose in the first round to Oklahoma State. Head into the NCAA tournament. High expectations, lose in the second round to what I will qualify as an extremely inferior Syracuse Orange team. As a fan, as an alumnus, do you consider the season a disappointment?
Well, first and foremost, I think you hit it on the head. It was high expectations going into both. Was it a disappointment? Not necessarily. I think obviously it was a COVID year with everything, and they did well. Those that they played well against and lost to, they were in every game. Most games, I believe, I heard a statistic, they didn't lose a game more than 5 points. But going into the tournaments, you had high expectations. High disappointment losing to Oklahoma State for a third time, first round of the Big 12 tournament. Very high disappointment losing to, as you said, probably an undermatched team in Syracuse that just got hot. Not to mention that just got hot, but they came out with the off-the-wall, surprising matchup 2-3 zone defense that looked like West Virginia had never seen before, not in the 20 years that they played against them in the Big East, nor in the relationship between one Bobby Huggins and Jimmy Boeheim. But the 2-3 matchup zone looked like it took them a little bit by surprise in the first half of that second-round game.
There's no doubt that it took them by surprise. It was almost disgusting to watch them try to place round ball and round hole against that defense. And I was particularly surprised by that because West Virginia this year has had what I will qualify as high-level collegiate point guard play and has demonstrated that they were able to move the ball around. I figured they would be able to get into the gaps of that zone, and they just not only did they not get into the gaps of the zone, but they didn't shoot the ball well. And it just gave a team that, again, in my mind, was just completely inferior, all the confidence in the world. The second half was competitive. It was interesting, but yeah, I was disappointed for selfish reasons because West Virginia contributed to the further implosion of my bracket. I was going to get to the uncomfortable place of our brackets. That's what she said. But where do you see next year, and what's the likelihood that you think COVID is going to impact the 2022 basketball season?
Well, man, you never know. We're 9 months away from another basketball season starting, and a lot can happen. The word is obviously back, and you and I were talking about this beforehand. Vaccines are coming strong, so we don't know. From a team standpoint, I think we're still going to be really competitive. I was watching that first round game, and you mentioned it. It was stellar big boy basketball guard play, right? Deuce McBride. Deuce McBride is an absolute baller. And, that first round game seemed like a national coming out party for him. But unfortunately, they did not bounce the round ball into the round hole very well or shoot it into the hole very well. And every time they got an open shot and broke the 2-3 matchup, obviously they were surprised that they were even open. Therefore, throwing said round ball against square backboard, not in round hole.
Yeah,
so, I think as a team, I think they're going to be good. I mean, it's a young team, but what does sports mean in COVID world? I don't know, man. I'm looking at baseball season right now and hoping to be able to get to some games, but nobody knows what's going to happen over the next few months.
Yeah, that's a whole nother can of worms, so to speak, the baseball season. And as a baseball fan, I know you are as well, I'm deeply concerned with what's going to happen to baseball in general if they don't come to some sort of resolution, because I believe this is the last year of the collective bargaining agreement. And by way of the negotiations that have been had up until this point, I'm not sure that there's any more contentious relationship in America unless it's between the Republicans and the Democrats in the Senate right now. There just doesn't seem to be any likelihood of consensus between the owners and the players. And I don't think, given COVID, given all of the distractions that we have in America today, given the fact that baseball right now isn't really popular with the younger generation, what if it goes away for a year?
Right. And I think that's a legitimate fear. And, this is a whole nother argument we could have at a whole nother time. That's a segment in its own. But, if you look at it where it is, we saw it last summer where it just got so bad between the Players Association and the owners that it didn't seem like last year was going to happen. And, as we come into 2021, they used the designated hitter last year in the National League. And I'll be honest, I was not a fan of that going into it, nor the runner at second base to start the extra innings. But I love both of them. The DH in the National League, I'm probably as exhausted as everyone else, even though I love the quote unquote traditions of baseball, of seeing a person who throws the ball professionally trying to be the person who hits the ball professionally. And that those two things don't happen. Rarely happen. Obviously, we've got one in LA, but, the fact that they did not bring the DH into the 2021 season, and word is the owners are using that as a quote-unquote trump card or a bargaining chip, if you will, during the next negotiations. I don't think it's sitting well on anybody right now.
I'm glad you brought this point up, because as a curmudgeon, a self-proclaimed curmudgeon, and often a self-righteous, contemptible prick, I also thought that the DH and the runner on second base were terrible ideas. And in reality, in practice, I quite enjoyed both of them. This is the same symptom that I had when the NHL went to the overtime, where they started just cutting people out, right? Instead of playing 5-on-5 in overtime, it's like, all right, well, screw it. Just start playing 4-on-4 or play 3-on-3. I didn't think I would like it, but it certainly incented teams to go for it. And the shootout at the end of regulation, I think it's inspired teams to go for it, because points are at stake and you don't get the same thing in a draw. Here I am watching the baseball game thinking this is going to be the stupidest thing I've ever seen. They're going to put a runner at second base. But God bless, does it not change the entire way the game is played in these extra innings and the way it's managed? I don't know why baseball wants to shoot itself in the foot to the degree that it does, but it seems hell-bent on doing so, does it not?
I agree 100%. It's a bit of almost an inner fight with what should happen and what the quote-unquote traditional rules are. The traditionalists even came around for the most part with the rules that were there. And I don't know. The players don't trust the owners with the books. That word came out at the end of last year, when they were actually during last year when they were trying to get the season started. And the owners are proclaiming welfare and misery, and yet they won't share any of the revenue numbers. I think there's a new TV contract coming up at some point in time soon. Granted, the stadiums are empty last year, and I'm sure there were revenues lost from that standpoint. The Braves themselves, my devoted team, has everything outside of the stadium, the Battery, where you can consume food and beverages prior to and after game. Even midweek, when there is no game, you can partake in beverages and food. But and I'm sure those were down as well. But come on, they couldn't have lost that much. I take that back. That's a silly statement from me. Yes, they lost money, but if you're going to have a rational conversation with this, let's bring everything to the table and let's get the numbers out in front of everyone and agree on them.
Right.
And then maybe we can move forward. But the contention that is between those two parties right now it's going to be tough next year if they don't come to some sort of terms on something.
You were very polished and diplomatic in the way you presented that. The owners are flat out liars, right? They are flat out liars when it comes to the revenues and the dire straits, that they claim to be in when it comes to the overall financial viability of the game. That to me is part of the frustration. I know that the baseball union, I'll spit that out. The union in and of itself is probably the most powerful union in all of professional sports, but I don't know how you claw that back as an ownership group by lying about the numbers. That's just, it seems like a very short-sighted, dim-witted strategy that may ultimately kill a game that I know both you and I love, but I can practically guarantee you in the last 6 or 7 minutes that we've been talking about this, we've driven off every one of the female listeners that I have to this show, and I could probably count them all on one hand, right? So,
without a question. Yes, I agree with you. Liars and cheaters, and it's almost as if they kind of huddle up in a room and say, "Hey, listen, I got an idea. Let's pull this one over him. You think we can squeeze it by? Tell them we're poor."
Yeah, it's almost it almost beggars belief, but in the 21st century, just given everything that we see in media, that we see in politics and religion, I don't know how you can be astonished anymore. I feel like anyone feels like no matter what position they take, as long as they believe it fervently and they have enough marketing around it, they're going to stick to it.
Right.
So we've gotten away from it, and I knew we would, but I don't actually mind. Let's get back to the NCAA tournament, but let's go specifically to your NCAA bracket. My bracket is a shit show. I think that's an appropriate term. I have demonstrated that I know nothing about college basketball by way of filling out a bracket full of teams and trying to pick one team to defeat another. I did not do well at this. How about you?
Well, I believe that one simple word can exemplify and really bring into the vision of your listeners how I did on my bracket, and that is absolute debauchery.
Yeah.
My bracket was watching the same shit show that yours was.
I want to find... Look, there's probably about 40 people in Oklahoma that did, but I want to find all of them and kick them in the balls for Oral Roberts. Are you kidding me? Oral Roberts beating Ohio State the way that they did, and then watching Florida implode. You know me, I'm a Tennessee guy, so I'm no fan of Florida, but having Oral Roberts now in that slot, just unbelievable. And I think out of all the teams that I've watched play, I felt like I didn't understand why Oral Roberts continued to win, but they continued to do so. Given the way that they've played and the way that opponents have played against them, I think that they've got a good chance against Arkansas, right? Am I wrong about this?
No, I agree. But as you so eloquently put it, I also know nothing apparently about picking teams against teams in the NCAA basketball tournament.
Yeah, that's true. It's crapshoot.
It's astonishment. As I look at my bracket, I was in two separate pools this year. Neither of them were traditional bracket pools. One was an auction, $25 to get in. You got $100 to spend on teams. They auction off as teams are pulled out of the hat. Failure, absolute failure. Okay. The other is a survivor pool.
Oh,
pick a team per round. $20 to get in. Pick a team per round. Your team wins, you move on. Also failure. As I look at the carnage that is my bracket, there were, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, 32 contests on first day, correct?
Yes.
Let me ask you, Patrick, how many contests did you pick correctly in first round?
You know what? I'd actually have to go through and start looking at it, but not that I would take a long time to do so. I could probably do it on air as we sit here and talk because that's how few I actually got right. Out of those 32, it's far below 50%. Every one of the so-called upsets that I picked, the higher seed won, and these other upsets, and they are truly upsets, just never saw it coming. I mean, again, Syracuse, no. To make it as far as they did, absolutely not. Oral Roberts, laughable. UCLA, I didn't even think UCLA should have made the tournament, right? And here they are now in the elite, or they're playing Alabama to go to the Elite Eight. I speechless. I think it's indicative, though, of how important it is, not only in a normal tournament year, but particularly in a COVID year, to have an older, more experienced team with strong point guard play, because we've seen those teams run circles around teams that look more athletic, that look bigger, that look like they should just run those teams off the court, and the bigger, more athletic team looks like they can't tell their left from the right, or didn't know that, a basketball was round. Unbelievable.
I agree, and I think it may be a little bit more than that, but a lot of it is the key phrase is in some of the games that we've seen is discipline, right?
Yeah, that's a good point.
It's been absolute discipline. Why did Oral Roberts win? Discipline. Why did Loyola win? Discipline. Right? They went back to fundamentals. They ran the same play to get the same 3-point shot. I don't even know how many times against Illinois, who you made comment in a text thread that that you don't want Illinois in your bracket based off of what they have been doing.
Yes.
Is it indicative of or condemnation of the Big 12? I heard the other day, I believe it was SVP late night, that they had the Big Ten had half of the top 2 seeds in the tournament. They had 8 teams in the top 2 seeds in the tournament.
And they've got one left, right?
They got spanked. They got spanked to the point that one of our good friends, JP, made a note to himself in his calendar on his Google machine for Selection Sunday 2021, asking himself the question, do you really trust the Big Ten?
This is an excellent point. I'm glad we're going into this thread, because Big Ten fan was thumping their chest all year about the Big Ten. And by way of the contests on the television screen, these teams looked like, against one another, the best conference. And in reflection, they may all have been somewhat the same team. They had very, very strong inside post play. They had some kids that could shoot the three. I'm not sure that they ever demonstrated their acumen running very polished offensive sets in the half court, right?
Correct.
And that has absolutely killed them in the NCAA tournament. In fact, I think the only team that has demonstrated that they could do that was Michigan, and they did so actually very well against LSU. LSU was the team that looked like they got nervous down the stretch and couldn't run a half-court set. But that actually gives me pause because, again, I wanted the upset. I didn't have Michigan going to the Final Four. I think now they've got a hell of a chance of not only going to the Final Four the way they're playing, but they can make a run at the title, right?
Without a question. And Michigan was one of those teams. And I'll address 2 things. One is the style of play in the Big Ten this year, as you were referring. But Michigan themselves, obviously they played well early in the year. They skyrocketed. Juwan Howard has done a phenomenal job in year 1. And they came out of nowhere after winning this tournament in the Bahamas early on in the season. But in the auction pool that I was in, I was one of the last bidders on the last team that was pulled, which was the University of Michigan Wolverines. And the bidding got to the point I had just enough, but somebody had just enough more than me to outbid me for the team. And as he claimed victory, as he looked at me and laughed and said, I got that team. I looked at him and laughed, and I said, that's great. That team will be out in the second round. I had no faith in them whatsoever. And the Big Ten against each other, you're correct, looked phenomenal. I'll equate that to what's near and dear to my heart and possibly yours through the 90s in the Big East, where the style of play was so conducive to big bodies bounding down below, but it didn't play well nationally.
That's a great point.
Even a better analogy, Big 12 football.
Right.
And the style of play in Big 12 football.
Right.
It looks good against each other, and you've got to plan for that team that you're going to play or that style of play, but it does not play on a national stage.
This is a good analogy. In fact, both were good analogies because, yes, being from the DMV as we were, Big East basketball was, Monday nights, that was must-see TV, and those teams did match up well against one another. But, by way of the number of national championships, that style of play, often fell short in the NCAA tournament. And I think the Big 12 football analogy is even more apropos because, I'm out west. I've got that on TV a lot. Those are fun games to watch. I quite enjoy them, and I also get deluded into thinking that based on the way those offenses can spread you out and move up and down the field, that they're going to have a chance if they make it to the Final Four, right? The college football playoff. And time again, I have been proven to be wrong in that respect as well. Based on who's left in the tournament.
Yes.
Who do you have in the Final Four, and then who do you have winning the national championship?
Based off of who's left. So let's go to the debauchery that was my bracket for a second. I asked you about your teams and how many you got. I actually got 20 out of 32 in the first round. So winning percentage, probably get fired if I'm a college football coach. I'm in the playoffs if I'm in the NBA.
True that.
The next round was even worse. 6 of the 16 games I picked correctly. So as the picker of games, I will attempt to give some rationale behind it, but it's going to be wrong. Let's be honest.
Fair.
I think that you've got to look at a couple things. One of which is style of play and can I outrun you and outshoot you. Two teams come to mind there. They're the only two teams that I still have in a Final Four, and that's Gonzaga and Baylor. Gonzaga, I've watched limited. West Virginia played them this year, played really well against them, but lost. Baylor, West Virginia played this year, played really well against them, and lost. Baylor is a good basketball team. They bounce the round ball well, and they put it in the round hole, and they are quick as hell. I think Baylor's got a legitimate shot at this. I don't know about Gonzaga. You always think about those teams that are top ranked, that are the quote-unquote mid-majors that haven't really played anybody, and you don't really know until they play somebody, and then you know. They could be in that situation, but they could feasibly go undefeated. I think those are really the top two. I hate to go chalk on it, but looking at the teams, looking at the games, you got to give them a shot. I agree with you that Oral Roberts has a chance against Arkansas. Of course, I had both those games wrong. I had Texas Tech in the Elite Eight wrong.
As did I.
Correct. But they've got a shot against Arkansas. Houston, honestly, didn't know they were playing that good of basketball anyway. Didn't know they still had a basketball team. I hear Clyde played there at one point in time.
Right.
I hear they might have had some good players 20 years ago, but didn't know that they were still a basketball school. Alabama, same thing. Had no clue. And I think that's a result of what you watch in a COVID year where your team is pretty much only playing teams in their conference. But I think that's it. I think Gonzaga and Baylor, I would watch out for Baylor. If they stay as they are, they can run it with anybody. Gonzaga has 6 people that can throw up a shot from anywhere and have a 95% chance of making it. Those are your teams.
I like this assessment. I am going with an interesting Final Four. Only because of experience, I'm picking Loyola Chicago to actually win the Midwest. I think it's going to be between Loyola Chicago and Houston. But Houston did not look great against Rutgers and was able to pull out a win. I'm not convinced by Houston. I think that number 2 seed was almost a gift. Michigan and Alabama is going to be a very interesting game. And because I have hate, I'm going to pick Michigan. Although, after having seen them play twice against Tennessee this year, my mind is saying Alabama and my heart is saying Michigan. And I have no love for the Big Ten, but it's hard for me to root for Alabama. Gonzaga, this bracket's a joke. I'll just leave it at that. And Baylor. I actually think that the final is Gonzaga-Baylor, and I think it's going to be a New England Patriots, New York Giants scenario that Baylor's going to come from behind at the end of the game, beat Gonzaga, give them their first defeat. Baylor is your national champion.
I think that's a good call. As I look at the Final Four, you mentioned Loyola. I would not put that past them at all. But what I also would not cross out completely is Syracuse, as undermanned or as lesser of a team as they may have been. If those kids keep shooting like they did against West Virginia, if Buddy Boeheim and Girard keep throwing up the rock like they did and throwing it up from 35 and putting it in, there's nobody that can stop them. If they're on, I don't know who can stop them.
That's a fair point. I've got the curmudgeon in me saying they can't shoot like that every game.
Correct.
That I don't want to say it was a fluke because they do have shooters on that team, but to hit the way that they did, you know what? I'll give you an analogy. They reminded me of Colorado in Colorado's first round game where Colorado couldn't miss a shot. Colorado comes up against Florida State and the ball isn't going down and Florida State's going to beat you up, and they got beat up. You know, when they saw that those shots weren't going in from far, they could not go inside against Florida State, and that thing got ugly. So that's the only reason why I don't have any faith in Syracuse. I'm just not sure that they've demonstrated, at least over the course of the season, that they're going to be able to consistently shoot like that. But I do appreciate you raising that specter because, you know, a team that gets hot and can shoot the way that Syracuse did, playing that kind of 2-3 zone, whether it's a matchup zone or just a more traditional zone, people don't like to play against that. They just don't. So that'll be interesting. Well, Brian, I appreciate the time. I appreciate you coming on to the show. I hope we can do this again soon in the event that any 3 people actually listen to this. I will throw out a hashtag for you in the show notes, and maybe you'll get a few thumbs up on what the kids call the social media sites.
The social media sites. Mr. Patrick, thank you for having me on your delightful program. Congratulations on the quick success on said podcast. It has been very thoughtful, very well done, very humorous. I will confirm it's not just a self-proclaimed curmudgeon. You are a confirmed curmudgeon. And I know that we all appreciate that very, very much. Thanks for the time.
Thank you, man.
Act 3 more sports.
A friend of mine sent me a story about a Cubs minor leaguer, a single A prospect, that was busted with over 21 pounds of meth in his duffel bag. Immediately, I thought to myself, Scottsdale. Scottsdale is like the Overlook Hotel in The Shining. Once you're there, it's going to suck you in. But as more information came out about the story, as it unfolded, it took a much darker turn. Jesus Camargo Corrales, busted with over 21 pounds of meth in his duffel bag while traveling to what he claims was Denver, Colorado. He was arrested in Eagle, Colorado, a routine traffic stop because he was weaving and acting erratically while operating his motorized vehicle. Camargo Corrales is from Sinaloa, Mexico. If I asked any of you to point it out on a map, and granted, I'm the same way, I couldn't point to the state of Sinaloa in Mexico. Have I heard of the Sinaloa cartel? In the immortal words of Nathan R. Jessup, you're goddamn right I have. After being questioned in possession of 21 pounds of methamphetamine, Camargo Corrales claimed that he was given $500 to simply place it in his car as he was making this scheduled road trip. Unfortunately, this ties in all too well with the first segment of this very podcast. I don't know the street value of 21 pounds of methamphetamine, but I think it's fair to say that that's well into the six figures. I think it's flirting with seven figures. And yet here is a minor league baseball prospect claiming to have been offered as little as $500 in order to transport it from point A to point B. Two things strike me about that. First thing, bullshit. Absolute and total bullshit. You're only going to get $500 for transporting what could be $500,000 worth of methamphetamine from ostensibly Arizona to Colorado? Bullshit. But the second thing that strikes me is, oh, that's absolutely true. You see, the Sinaloa cartel isn't one for negotiation. This man grew up in Sinaloa. He likely has family in Sinaloa. The cartel may have thrown him a bone for making this trip, thrown him $500, but certainly he had a lot more at stake than the money involved in making that trip, in transporting those drugs. The cartel could have very easily said, the purity of every female member of your family is at stake. The safety of every male member of your family is at stake. The news coverage surrounding this was quite curious. No real in-depth analysis of whether or not this person was threatened by the cartel. In fact, the analysis centered on the Cubs' reaction and scouts' reactions that this player was not a highly touted prospect within the organization. The implication, of course, being that his loss from the Cubs farm system is not that big a hit to the team. And so the wheel continues to spin, folks. And so the wheel continues to spin. This is Why I Don't Vote, a podcast.